When you think about Switzerland, you're probably picturing what everyone else is: chocolate, watches, and maybe a polite banker. That's the Switzerland the algorithm wants you to see. But there's an entire country thrumming underneath that postcard version. A place where mountain villages still operate on rhythms that predate Instagram, where lakes reflect peaks so perfectly they feel like a graphics glitch, and where you can eat fondue without feeling like you're trapped in a theme park. This is the Switzerland I'm obsessed with. And if you're the type of traveler who'd rather skip the crowded observation decks and find yourself in a tiny train car cutting through alpine meadows at sunset, then you're in exactly the right place. Stick around because we're about to rewire how you think about Switzerland entirely. And hey, if you're finding this useful, smash that like button and subscribe to Passport Unfolded, because we do this kind of deep dive into the world's most overlooked corners all the time. The thing about getting to Switzerland right, and I mean really right, is understanding that it's not one country. It's a collection of microclimates, languages, and temperaments stacked vertically on top of each other. The minute you start treating it like a linear journey, you've already lost the plot. Instead, think of it as a series of moods. Sometimes you want alpine drama. Sometimes you want Renaissance charm. Sometimes you want to sit by a lake so pristine, it makes every other body of water you've ever seen look secondhand. This is a country where the train schedule is so sacred that Swiss people use the punctuality of their trams as a personality trait. And honestly, that level of logistical precision means you can actually improvise without feeling like you're gambling with your vacation. Let's start where most people expect you to go, but where almost nobody actually ends up staying long enough to understand. The Valais region, specifically around Zermatt and the Matterhorn. Showing up to Zermatt and immediately sprinting to the Matterhorn viewing platforms is like going to a Michelin-starred restaurant and only tasting the bread. The mountain is undeniably there. This lopsided pyramid of rock that looks like it was rendered by someone who didn't understand how mountains actually worked. But the real Zermatt is in the wooden buildings with their weathered shutters, the narrow streets where car-free zones mean you're basically walking through a 200-year-old painting, and the restaurants where the owners have been serving raclette and fondue to the same families for decades. I wandered the back streets and found Restaurant Schloss Hotel in a 200-year-old chalet. The waiter, Beat, suggested we order their house specialty, a slow braised beef that had been resting in wine and juniper berries. The meat was so tender, it was essentially a philosophical argument against eating anything else for the rest of your life. That's Zermatt when you stop chasing the mountain and start chasing the experience. Now, the Matterhorn is absolutely going to pull at you. I won't pretend otherwise. But here's the move that changes everything. Instead of doing the tourist thing and taking the GORNERGRAT railway up to the viewing platform during peak daylight hours when you're packed shoulder to shoulder with 1,000 other people who just want the photo, go to GORNERGRAT at sunset. I'm talking maybe an hour before the light actually dies. The railway takes about 40 minutes from Zermatt, and yes, it's a cogwheel train that climbs at a grade that makes you feel like you're in a ski lift. But by the time you get up there, something shifts. The light turns everything the color of honey and old gold. And the mountain, which looks like a million other photos you've seen, suddenly looks like it exists in a different dimension. There's a place called Hotel GORNERGRAT up there, and sure, you can eat there, but I prefer to time it, so I arrive just at that magic hour, watch the light for maybe 30 minutes, and then head back down. The whole thing takes 3 hours, and it's the most uncrowded experience of the mountain you'll have. But if you're really serious about understanding the Valais, and by extension, understanding this whole region, you need to take the GORNERGRAT Railway, or even better, the cogwheel train experience, and then break that pattern by heading east toward Lauterbrunnen. This valley is the anti-hype version of alpine tourism, and I mean that as the highest compliment possible. Lauterbrunnen is this long, narrow valley where everything is vertical. Cliffs rise thousands of feet on either side, and waterfalls cascade down the rock faces like Switzerland's way of bragging about its water management. There's a famous waterfall here called Staubach Falls, and the thing that makes it remarkable isn't that it's high. It's that on windy days, the water gets blown sideways before it hits the ground, so it basically evaporates in mid-air as mist. That detail, that small detail about wind turning water into atmosphere, is the kind of thing that separates seeing Switzerland from understanding it. The village itself is low-key to the point of being almost invisible, which is exactly why you should stay there. There's this restaurant called Silberhorn that serves what might be the best rusty I've ever had. These are basically potato pancakes. But the way they make them here with a crispy exterior and a soft, almost creamy interior, and topped with a fried egg and bacon that's been smoked locally, is the kind of food that makes you understand why certain dishes survive centuries. Eat it, take a walk along the valley floor at dusk, and you'll see what I mean about Switzerland existing in these pockets of perfect quietness that the algorithm doesn't even know how to categorize. From Lauterbrunnen, the natural move is toward Interlaken. But here's where I'm going to ask you to recalibrate your expectations. Interlaken is famous for being the adventure capital. And yes, there's paragliding and bungee jumping and all the extreme sports marketing that makes it feel like a teenage theme park. But Interlaken is also positioned between two lakes, Lake Brienz and Lake Thun. And what I discovered is that the real power move is to skip the downtown area almost entirely and head to the lakefront. Specifically, I spent an afternoon on the south shore of Lake Brienz, just sitting by the water, watching swans that look like they've never heard of casual living. There's a tiny dock area where locals rent kayaks, and I took one out for maybe 2 hours, staying close to shore, mostly just gliding past the reflection of the mountains in water, so clear it felt like time fraud. No tourists, no noise, just the sound of water and the occasional cowbell and in the distance from the pastures above. The key to Interlaken is actually using it as a launching point rather than a destination itself. This is where the train connections diverge in about 17 different directions. And this is where you make the call about what kind of Switzerland you want next. If you want high-altitude drama, this is where you board a train headed toward JUNGFRAUJOCH. If you want villages and hiking and the sound of cowbells, this is where you head the other direction. I chose Jungfraujoch because I wanted to understand why people describe it as the top of Europe. And the reality is that the railway experience is half the appeal. They call it the Jungfrau Railway, and it's a mountain railway that climbs to about 3,454 meters, which is high enough that you start noticing the absence of oxygen without it being dangerous. The train passes through tunnels that were literally blasted through the mountain 100 years ago in every few kilometers. The doors open at a station called Kleine Scheidegg, or Eiger Station, and you're basically standing inside a mountain looking out at views that don't have a frame of reference. When you finally arrive at Jungfraujoch, there's a building called the Jungfraujoch Top of Europe. And yes, it's touristy. They sell expensive hot chocolate and have an ice palace carved into the glacier. But what they don't advertise is that if you time your arrival correctly and avoid the midday crush, you can stand outside in the thin air and just absorb the scale of it. I'm talking maybe 20 different peaks, visible from a single vantage point, all of them over 4,000 meters, all of them looking like someone arranged them in a landscape painting and then forgot to finish rendering it. The air is so clean, it's almost alarming. And you can see weather systems moving across the valleys below like living things. Bring a good jacket and warm socks, eat something, and then just sit for a while. This is peak altitude Switzerland, and it requires you to acknowledge that some things are bigger than you are. The counterweight to Jungfraujoch is the ALETSCH glacier, which is the largest glacier in the Alps and feels more like a geological event than a tourist destination. To get there, you need to take a train to Riederalp or Bettenalp, and then hike along a trail that runs parallel to the glacier itself. What makes this experience different from Jungfraujoch is that you're not standing above it. You're standing next to it, watching ice that's thousands of years old accumulate and flow in ways that feel almost biological. The glacier is retreating, which is a bummer, but that also means you're witnessing geography in real time, watching the climate do something visible and irreversible. There's a cable car that goes up to a point called Eggishorn. And from there, the views of the glacier and the surrounding peaks are actually more dramatic than Jungfraujoch because you're at a different angle. It's less crowded, the experience feels less manufactured, and you're basically alone on a mountain looking at something that predates human civilization. From the high country, you need to descend. And this is where Grindelwald and Grindelwald first come into play. Grindelwald is another alpine village, but it's arranged so that it faces the Eiger directly, which means from almost every street, there's this dark, ominous rock face looming over everything. It's the kind of geography that makes you understand why people write dramatic novels and symphonies about mountains. Grindelwald first is accessible via a cable car, and the move here is to go in the early morning before the tour groups arrive and hike the Bachalpsee Trail, which loops around a lake that's literally positioned so that it mirrors the mountains behind it. The water is cold enough to be shocking if you're into alpine swimming, which is becoming increasingly popular. But even if you're not, the act of hiking this loop with nobody around you, just moving through the landscape, is the kind of experience that has nothing to do with accomplishment and everything to do with presence. You can't spend all your time in the high country because Switzerland is also where water, culture, and history intersect at lower elevations. That's where Lucerne comes in. Lucerne is often written off as too touristy, and yes, there are tour groups, but there's a profound sense of historical layering that makes it worth spending time there. The Old Town, or Altstadt, sits on the banks of Lake Lucerne, with medieval buildings directly reflected in the water, which sounds like marketing but is actually architecturally real. The city has covered wooden bridges, the Chapel Bridge, and the Sproyer Bridge, dating back to the 1300s. They're more like covered walkways that happen to cross water, decorated with paintings and religious scenes that have survived hundreds of years by staying indoors. What I found remarkable is that you can walk these bridges at any time of day, and they feel differently depending on the light. Early morning, they're ethereal. At midday, they're chaotic with tourists. At dusk, they're melancholic, in a way that's almost unbearable if you're paying attention. The thing about Lucerne is that the real move is to stay in or near the Altstadt and basically disappear into the narrow streets where the tourist infrastructure hasn't quite calcified yet. There's a restaurant called Rathaus Brauerei that sits in a medieval building and serves beer that's brewed on site. And the food, I'm talking about their schnitzel, their bratwurst, their potato gratin, is the kind of hearty, unpretentious cooking that sustains people through alpine winters. Sit at a wooden table, drink the beer, eat the food, and watch the light change on the lake through the window. That's Lucerne. Not the bridges, not the postcards, but the experience of being inside history without it feeling like a museum. From Lucerne, the train heads north to Zurich. But before you get there, you're going to want to understand Zurich's actual charm, which is radically different from its reputation. Zurich is known as a banking center, a place where money and precision and Germanic efficiency converge. And yes, that's all there. But the Altstadt, the Old City, is this compressed version of medieval Europe, where the streets are so narrow that sunlight barely reaches the ground level, and the buildings are layered so densely that you can't quite figure out how they all fit. The Altstadt stretches across both sides of the Limmat River, and it's connected by bridges and linked by alleyways that feel like they were designed by someone trying to maximize how many different directions a street could turn. I spent a morning wandering and ended up in Aurel Füssli bookstore, a historic building with multiple floors where bookshelves are arranged, so you're constantly discovering new rooms and sections. The building itself is the experience. Near there, Café Milchbar serves coffee where someone actually cared about the beans they were roasting, and they have pastries from Café im Neumarkt that will make you reevaluate your entire relationship with carbohydrates. What I'm trying to say is that Zurich doesn't advertise its charm because it doesn't have to. It's embedded in the infrastructure, in how people move through the streets, in the quality of light filtering through those narrow canyons of buildings. From Zurich, you have several options, but one of the most interesting is to head east toward Appenzell, which is in the northeastern part of Switzerland, and feels almost like a different country. Appenzell is famous for its folk traditions, its handmade textiles, and its status as one of the last semi-autonomous regions in Switzerland. The village itself is structured around a central square, and almost every building is painted with these elaborate folk art designs that have been updated and reinterpreted for generations. It sounds saccharine, but it's actually kind of stunning in its specificity. Each design means something. They're not just random ornaments. They're visual language encoding local history and family pride. There's a place called APPENZELL Alpenbitter Museum that explains the regional drink, which is an herbal liqueur that tastes like someone distilled the entire alpine region into 40% alcohol. Whether you actually buy a bottle is irrelevant. The museum itself is charming in this low-key way that suggests the entire village is basically just maintaining traditions, because those traditions are worth maintaining. The move from Appenzell is to not overthink it. Spend a few hours, eat a piece of Appenzell cheese, which is a local cheese that's been made with the same recipe for centuries and tastes like butter and nuts and thyme, and then move on. Appenzell is the kind of place that rewards calmness and punishes rushing around, trying to extract value from every moment. After the mountain regions and the alpine villages, you need to recalibrate toward water, and that's where Lake Geneva and the surrounding region pulls you in. Geneva itself, the city on the western tip of the lake, has a reputation for being expensive, corporate, and basically a waiting room for international bureaucracy. And there's truth to that. But the lakefront, specifically the area south of the city center along the Promenade de la Roseraie, is a completely different experience. I walked along there on a spring afternoon. And there were these rose gardens arranged in alphabetical order, and the light was hitting the water in that particular way it does when water is deeply cold and deeply clean. The view across the lake toward the French Alps is the kind of scenery that exists in a completely different category from normal landscapes. It's almost aggressive in its beauty. From Geneva, head northeast along the lake toward Montreux and the Lavaux region. Montreux is where the lake curves and the light hits it differently. The town is famous for the Montreux Jazz Festival happening since the 1960s. And even if you're not there during the festival, there's a vibe of cultural importance in the architecture and streets. But what I recommend is heading directly to Lavaux, a UNESCO World Heritage Vineyard region that stretches up the hillside from the lake. Lavaux looks like someone stacked vineyards on a mountain and forgot that gravity should prevent that. The terraces are so steep that mechanized farming is impossible, so everything harvests by hand. I hiked through Lavaux on a path running between vineyards and the lake, and moving between these carefully maintained rows of vines, while water shimmered below, is one of those moments where you understand why people made wine here for 1,000 years. Chasselas grapes produce crisp, mineral white wines worth stopping for at small wineries in the villages. The connection between a place and what it produces becomes almost visceral. Montreux itself also sits on the lake. And the thing about Montreux is that it was developed as a resort town in the 1800s, specifically because wealthy people from across Europe wanted to access the lake and the mountains from a central location. That means the architecture is a mix of Belle Époque grandeur and Victorian indulgence. And there are hotels like the Montreux Palace that feel like they're still hosting jazz musicians and aristocrats, even though we're well into the 21st century. For eating, there's a restaurant called Palais Stéphanie that sits right on the lake and serves food that's technically fine dining, but in a style that doesn't require you to wear a suit or take the experience too seriously. They do this slow-cooked fish that's been poached in a butter sauce with local herbs. And it arrives still steaming, and you eat it while watching the sunset across the water and the mountains turn blue. That's not just dinner. That's a statement about why you came to Switzerland in the beginning. From Montreux, if you head south, you're leaving the Alps. The Ticino region, and specifically the town of Lugano, is where you realize that Switzerland contains a Mediterranean pocket that nobody talks about. Lugano is technically in Switzerland, but culturally closer to Italy, and the vibe shifts immediately. The architecture becomes more Italian, the light is warmer. There's a piazza called Piazza della Riforma, arranged with the kind of social intentionality European squares are famous for: cafes, people sitting around doing basically nothing. A sense that public squares enable people to be together without needing a reason. I sat there for 90 minutes, drank a coffee that tasted like someone had invented flavor, and watched how people moved through the space. There's no rush in Lugano. It's almost like Switzerland got tired of being Switzerland and decided to spend a day being Italy instead. The lakefront in Lugano is where I'd actually recommend staying. Specifically on the east side, where the mountains rise directly from the water and you're basically living inside a postcard. There's a path called the Sentiero di Nesso that runs along the lake for a few kilometers. And it's one of those walks that exists purely for the pleasure of walking. No destination required. Just the experience of moving between the water and the mountains. Bring a picnic or head to a restaurant called Ticino Restaurant that sits literally on the water and serves fresh fish and pasta that tastes like it came from a different era of cooking, where the focus was on ingredients rather than techniques. Before you leave Switzerland entirely, there's the Rhine Falls near Schaffhausen in northeastern Switzerland. The Rhine Falls are the largest waterfall in Europe by volume, and standing in front of them is massive. The water drops about 23 meters and is so voluminous you feel the mist from a quarter-mile away. The sound becomes white noise. If you stand there long enough, there's a castle called Neunschloss on a rock in the middle, which is simultaneously picturesque and disorienting. You can take a boat right up to the base. You're underneath them, soaked by spray, feeling millions of tons of water moving downward. And it's unambiguously awe-inducing. It's hard to photograph well because the scale is difficult to capture in 2 dimensions, which means you have to experience it in person. No algorithm can reduce this to a content format. Here's the thing about all of this. Switzerland is designed in a way that makes traveling incredibly easy. The trains run on time, the connections make logical sense, and the infrastructure supports moving around. But the trap is moving too quickly, ticking boxes and treating Switzerland like a checklist. What makes Switzerland actually interesting is the opposite approach. It's the willingness to sit on a train for an extra hour, because the view justifies it. It's the decision to walk through a village for no reason other than curiosity. It's the commitment to sitting in a cafe for 2 hours with a single coffee because you're not trying to accomplish anything. That's where the magic lives, in the pockets of emptiness, in the moments where you're not documenting, not rushing, just present in the landscape. Every single recommendation I've mentioned, Zermatt, the Matterhorn, JUNGFRAUJOCH, Lauterbrunnen, Lucerne, INTERLAKEN, Bern Old Town, Geneva Lakefront, Montreux and Lavaux, Zurich ALTSTADT, ALETSCH Glacier, Grindelwald First, GORNERGRAT, APPENZELL, Lugano, Rhine Falls. These are places where Switzerland exists in its most genuine state. They're not hidden exactly, but they're not the ones marketing the hardest. They're the ones rewarding patience and attention. And if you want all the specific addresses, the best times to visit, the recommendations for where to eat and where to sleep, everything's in the video description so you can add whatever calls to you into your own itinerary. If this made you want to book a trip to Switzerland immediately, or if you're already planning and this helped clarify where to actually spend your time, please hit that like button and subscribe to Passport Unfolded. We release videos like this regularly about places that refuse to fit into the normal travel narrative, about destinations that reward curiosity and care. You're part of a community of people who understand that real travel is about moments, not monuments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.